Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm starting a series of reviews, I guess, of pre-Goosebumps R.L. Stine kids horror reviews. Now, I've touched on a few in the past, kind of indirectly, because at the time I reviewed certain books, I didn't know they predated Goosebumps until after the fact. But I want to continue on and kind of shed some light on some obscurities on the channel, because I know some of you like this stuff. And I decided to pick a story that Stine wrote in 1988 through 1989 in Dynamite Magazine. Now, I don't have the Dynamite Magazine issues, but I do have some examples of other ways you can get the story. It was printed again in a different magazine later on, known as Thrills and Chills Magazine. It was also printed in a, I guess, writing skills pamphlet type of magazine known as Thrills, Chills, Reading and Writing Skills. And it was also put in the early 2000s, I believe, into a series that was formerly known as Scholastic Read 180. So we're going to be discussing a lesser known R.L. Stine story that I've mentioned a few times on the channel before, and it's called Zoomers. Now I have here the fourth and final time the story was printed, but this is in book form, and this is probably the most accessible way you're going to be able to find this story if you're looking to get this for your collection out there. So if you want to read this, this might be a good option for you. But if you're lucky enough online, I think the first 3 or 4 issues of Thrills and Chills magazine reprints the story Zoomers using the original art that was in Dynamite magazine's original printing from the late 80s. And if you really want something cool for your collection, I love the cover art for this. This might be my favorite cover art outside of Goosebumps related to R.L. Stine ever. This is the Thrills, Chills, Reading and Writing Skills pamphlet thing I was telling you about. And it has the really cool red ant cover with the kid. This collects the whole original story as well, with the original art from Dynamite magazine as well. Now, what's cool about this Scholastic Read 180 version is that it has brand new artwork made for this book in mind. So this might be something, again, worth your time to check out. This honestly has my favorite artwork of the story that you're going to be able to find, because this is a short story that has artwork accompanied with it as you read it. So take that for what you will. So with that brief historical lesson out the way, Zoomers. I mentioned in the past, I think when I brought up Zombie Town's movie adaptation a while back. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Zombie Town was a R.L. Stine novella that was released in the early 2000s that got turned into a movie a few years back. And I said that there's a couple of books out there that I think on the surface have a lot of room to roll with and make a full movie out of. Zoomers, I said, was one of them. And after reading this for this review, I stand by that. I think there's a lot of room here to expand on this little short story here. This reads and feels like a Tales to Give You Goosebumps short story, in case you're out there wondering. It's a very short and sweet kind of thing. It's maybe like 10 to 12 pages long at max. But then again, you know, it still reads kind of shorter than your average Tales to Give You Goosebumps short story in a weird way as well. So yeah, this is definitely something that I think could be expanded on in a full movie. There's a really cool, fun idea. You know, R.L. Stine, especially when, you know, we're looking at Goosebumps or Nightmare Room or anything else that he's done in the kids' horror realm since 1992, he's done quite a few alien stories. And this one is up there with the most different feeling of the ones I've seen him do. There's a fun concept with some interesting villains here that I would like to see, like I said, expanded on in something else. Who knows? But yeah, if you want to go check this out on your own leisure, or maybe you want this for your collection, I recommend it. I think it's worth your time. It does have some issues, as we'll get into in the review, but yeah, just know that going into it, that this is pre-Goosebumps, this is pre-R.L. Stine kind of finding his element. You can definitely see some jovial Bob Stine-isms, like how he was known for in the late 80s in this short story a little bit. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see some of his first real kids horror stuff he ever made put on paper. So with that being said, what is Zoomers about in a nutshell? So the main characters of the story are Ben and Ginny, and they're a pair of siblings, and they live in a household with supportive parents. Yeah, this is an R.L. Stine story where the parents are heavily involved. And if you're not used to that, this might take you aback a bit. But Ben and Ginny's parents are preparing the day before the 4th of July to want to go to Ginny's swim practice. And they're getting the car loaded up. They're excited to drive 8 blocks to go to the pool, escape the summer heat a bit, and, of course, let Ginny practice her swimming. But when the dad turns on the car, he notices that the engine isn't turning over. And when he looks under the hood to see what's going on with the engine, he realizes that it's missing. And somebody has stolen the engine out of the car. So Ben and Ginny and their parents then surmise a conclusion to essentially run 8 blocks to go to the pool. And they pretty much make a break for it and start running. And I believe the dad stays behind for a moment to call the police to let them know that the engine was stolen out of their car. But I guess he catches up with them. But as the family are running down the blocks of these streets, they notice that there's these giant walls. And everything, like the backdrop of the houses, the bushes, and all of this seem to be painted on the walls. And this takes them aback. And they end up where they're supposed to be, where the swimming pool would be, but there's nothing there. It's just paint on the walls. And then, to make matters worse, they start to hear this high-pitched screaming sound that pierces their eardrums. And it turns out that it might be coming from this giant insect, red ant-looking creature approaching them. And, of course, the family's freaked out and they don't know what to think of it. But the ant is like, ho, 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 I'm coming in peace. I'm friendly. But there's like this voice box translator that is messing up, and there's some error in communication at first. But once it kicks on, the ant creature reveals himself to be a part of a race called the Zoomers. And the family has been essentially abducted by the Zoomer alien creatures and have been brought to their home planet. And the Zoomers have essentially recreated their environment to allow them to live in this zoo on this on this alien planet that they're not used to. And the family starts to ask why this was the case. And the Zoomers are like, well, when we came to visit y'all, we learned that there was only 250 people left on the planet. And the mom and dad are like, what are you talking about? There's like 250 million people alone in America. And the Zoomers are like, oh, well, it's too late now. We already have a mission to go back to your planet to at least take some of your neighbors and bring them back here, so that way you know some people. And the family's listening to more of the story, and they learn that the Zoomers, they aren't the brightest bulbs in the box. They have had to borrow spacecraft technology from a neighboring planet to be able to go travel to planet to look for, I guess, zoo specimens for their own planet. And they don't take a liking to the information that the parents have essentially given this messenger ant. And they're told that they're going to have to remain inside of this playpen, essentially. And if they don't cooperate and they try to break out or try to, thwart the plans of the Zoomers, essentially the family is going to be fed to other alien specimens that just so happen to have their own little playpens at the zoo. So the family's like, okay, these guys are whacked. We got to find a way to get back home. And the only way they think is going to be their get out of jail free card here is to go on the spaceship that's supposed to be heading to Earth to get their neighbors. And they do some investigation, kind of like looking around their environment, and they see this alien spacecraft off in the distance, so they make this plan to go there. But when they try to head there, let's just say they have some hairy interactions with some of these Zoomer alien creatures, and after a few close calls, the family possibly ends up on the spaceship. And from here, they then find themselves on 4th of July, the day after they, I guess, realized that they disappeared, back on Earth after traveling through space. And when they're back on Earth, of course, since it's 4th of July in America, there's some fireworks to be had. And there's this element with sound that I haven't touched on yet, but this possibly plays a role in how the Zoomers communicate, or I guess visualize people. And they don't see people with sight, like eyeballs. They see people with like sound and interpreting what that, I guess, feels like in their brains. Well, when the fireworks are going off, obviously that interrupts the signals and causes a big old mess for these creatures. And we see what's going to result of Ben, Ginny, and their parents in the aftermath of all the fireworks going on 4th of July. So that, in a nutshell, is what you're going to expect out of the story, Zoomers here. So off the bat, I'm going to say this up front and what I liked about it. I liked that R.L. Stine was a bit creative with this story. You know, typically when you think about alien invasions or alien creatures abducting people, you think about like, the gray-skinned or green-skinned aliens, or maybe some aliens that kind of look like, I don't know, the aliens from Pandora, from Avatar, or maybe the aliens from Independence Day. You don't think about red, furry, giant insect creatures. That's the last thing you probably associate with aliens. But for this story, I think it was really fun, and how, I guess, well thought out these creatures were. You can definitely see that R.L. Stine had an idea of the species of the Zoomers, and put a lot of emphasis to the reader on how they communicate, how they see the world, maybe their intelligence level, and maybe their threat level even, and what they're willing to do to this family if they don't abide by, I guess, the plan that they have for them. So, yeah, I mean, for, like I said, like a 10 to 12 page short story, this was kind of refreshing. I'm not going to lie. Even though the concept of taking a family and bringing them to a alien planet has been done many times, quite a few times in Goosebumps, actually. It's no different here. But like I said, those creative swings makes you forget about that. You get what I'm saying? And I really enjoyed that the whole family was involved in this. This is something that R.L. Stine has rarely done in his time in kids' horror. He does it from time to time. Like, when you think about family-centered stories in Goosebumps particularly, I think the most common ones you'll think about is maybe Welcome to Dead House or Fever Swamp or something like that. Or maybe the Fever Swamps episode, I should say. But, outside of those, there's not many. And Zoomers here, the parents are super involved. They're proactive. They're along for the ride with the kids, literally. And it's really cool to see Stine kind of write parent dynamics into a kid's horror story, especially when he's trying to fit them into a short story. It's hard to explain unless you read it, but yeah, I thought that was really refreshing too. In terms of characters, Ben and Ginny are pretty stock. There's not a lot to them, but I guess the situations they found themselves in and the realizations they help come to with their parents in the story makes them kind of smart and aware of their situation. And, it makes them serviceable, especially for like a short story. They're not meant to be like, icons of, full-length books like a Carly Beth Caldwell or anything. They serve their purpose pretty well here. And, I don't really have much to complain about them. In terms of where the story goes, I actually really enjoyed the aspect of this story being set around 4th of July. And the inclusion of 4th of July in this story was actually pretty smart on Stine's part. And it makes me think that maybe he put a little more planning into this short story than some will come across later in his career, in his short fiction career, I should say. But yeah, the inclusion of like the fireworks and how the Zoomers communicate and see, I guess, other people or beings was really smart. And it made it kind of atmospheric at the same time. And it's kind of ironic that I'm reviewing this very close to 4th of July. Yeah, this is like a 4th of July read, if you're an R.L. Stine fan. you should have this just for that. There's something about it that kind of itches a scratch on that aspect. And you want to think that this is a holiday themed book or short story on the surface of it. So that was really fun to kind of discover about it. So yeah, I had some pretty sound positives with this short story. However, I do have some drawbacks with it. You know, on a short story basis, I do kind of like the idea of kind of explaining things or setting up at least some sort of a solid backstory to start off the story, or present it in a way that it comes across like a satisfying answer. And my first negative has to deal with how the story starts off, sadly. It kind of just throws you in randomly into a scenario where you think this family's on a, everyday excursion the day before 4th of July, but very quickly they realize they're kind of in a quote-unquote simulation, or I guess hamster cage, so to speak, on an alien planet. I wish that there was a little more leeway into that, maybe going into a situation where they think they're in this normal trajectory, but then there's some missing time element or something like that that's commonly known in the alien abduction phenomenon, if you're not familiar with that. I kind of wish there was aspects of that into the story to help segue into them being on the alien planet. I just felt like, in terms of pacing, that was kind of mulled over and kind of annoying. I get that this story was made for a magazine originally. It probably was never intended to be put into a book as an actual collected short story. But the fact that this story has been printed 4 times and there's no extended version of it kind of upsets me. Because I went through all the versions just to be, on the safe side, to make sure I'm getting the same story in any version I read. It's no different in this final one here. And sadly, this is one of those things that I think a movie can actually expand on and do something cool with. But unfortunately, it's just not in the short story. When it comes to the horror of it all, minus the stakes that you feel with the Zoomer aliens in the story, like threatening the family to feed them to, other aliens or what have you, you don't really feel much of a threat with the Zoomers, because they come across like they're not the smartest crayons in the box, if you get what I'm saying. But they have this creepy presence. Like, you look on the cover here and you see Jenny being, chased down by these ant aliens. That's kind of creepy, right? Or you look at the cover here, and I guess this is supposed to be Ben, or one version of Ben. The ant coming, to try to eat him. Scenes like this are not in the short story, and you would think they would be. And I guess the highlight of tension that you would get in this story would be when they're, I guess, in a semi-do-or-die situation, trying to hide their visibility from the aliens to make it to the spaceship. That's probably the most thrilling part of the short story, but then again, it's only like a paragraph or two. I feel like there's needed to be some more action involving the titular aliens here, and showing their threat presence, and maybe doing something a little more harrowing to make it pop. And I just didn't feel like the story popped enough with them, right? And I guess I'll get into the ending, which I barely touched on in the plot review. This is my final negative with it. When it comes to the ending, it's a little too kumbaya for my liking. Stine, in doing a kumbaya ending, is very rare. And reading it here, I was kind of taken aback by it, because it reminded me of an Are You Afraid of the Dark type of twist ending. It's not even a twist. It's just something you would come to expect from that show, not something written by R.L. Stine. You get what I'm saying? And when I read it, I was like, you know what? It's kind of cute. I was thinking in my head, like, okay, Stine hasn't found his idea of the twist yet, or what have you. But then again, I feel like there was a lot on the table given the climax, and I guess the very short resolution we saw with said climax, that maybe there could still be some sort of threat out there that the family has to deal with, and we just never got it. Or maybe like a shocking twist ending to, just leave the readers off with a gasp or something. No, it just didn't happen. It ended a little too lighthearted for my taste, and while it's not the worst thing ever, it was kind of corny. So all in all, what's my final thoughts on Zoomers? Honestly, for a short story, I thought this was pretty good. It's not the best thing ever, if I'm being honest, but it was good for a short story. You know what I mean? And for short stories, I do 0.5 increments. I don't do exact like 0.1 increments like I would a full book or anything, or an episode or a movie. Short stories get a 0.5 curve because they're short and sweet. They're not made to be scrutinized all that much. And I mainly look for like originality, execution of the idea, sending it home with the ending and all of that. If it has themes and messages, which if I want to touch on one last thing about it, this story really doesn't have themes or messages, but I will say that there is some sort of heartbeat of patriotism in the story that you can kind of pick up. It's kind of weird, but you wouldn't expect that out of a R.L. Stine story. But yeah, you can find that in here, I guess. But anywho, got sidetracked again. When it comes to those negatives, I decided to be kind of usual with how I judge those things, and I deducted, some significant points off for some things here, but I ended up giving this short story here a flat 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's good for a short story, like I said. It's definitely worth your time if you want to go check this out on your own to see if you like it. And like I said before, I think that this would be a great template to just take the core idea and just run with it for an R.L. Stine movie. I'm pretty sure that if they want to save money, the Zoomer creatures here would probably be full-blown CGI, or maybe they can kind of shorten it down to maybe 1 or 2 animatronics and just reuse them a bunch. I'm not expecting like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids level greatness or anything, but I will say that I think that the idea here would be fun for like a family horror adventure movie. If you make it PG-13 and you definitely, I don't know, you can definitely tweak the idea of the Zoomers and maybe give them some suits, or maybe they're like ant-human hybrid looking creatures instead of just full-blown ants. There's a lot of stuff you can work with here for a movie, but there's a lot of potential. And if we're going to do R.L. Stine movies set outside of Goosebumps, Nightmare Room, all of his properties, this is one I think they should maybe at least take a glance at. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Zoomers. Let me know down in the comment section if you've ever read this short story before. Do you love it? Do you hate it? And after hearing my thoughts and sharing some information about it, are you curious to check it out? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.